where sevens and eights are appropriate?
It's a good question. Yes, but my opinion. And by the way, I'm like I guess mentally try to be lazy. I guess efficient is the right way to say this. So I try to make things as simple as possible for myself so that I understand them, and then I try to make them as simple as possible for my clients and people I talk to. Right. So in terms of the programming, in general, right? You can do it all kinds of ways. There's only one program that gets prescribed with very little information. That's the starting strength novice linear progression, because it works so damn well for all of the reasons that I think most of you understand, and that Grant and I understand really well. Without knowing anything about you, other than that you haven't barbell trained before, this is the program you're going to do. It doesn't matter if you're a runner, cyclist, jiu-jitsu, stay-at-home mom, office accountant, whatever, you're doing the novice linear progression. All right, once you've run that process through and you've done it effectively, there's all kinds of ways to handle programming beyond that. All right. The way I handle program is to keep things as simple as possible and as close to the original process as possible, because it helps me, honestly. If I have a room of 5 people and I've worked with all of them, if I just look at their program, I know basically how long they've been doing it, and I know what the next step is going to be, and I know potentially where the issues have been. So it makes it really, really simple for me, right? So there's no 100% answer for post-novice program that's approved. People always want to know what's the next step. Rippetoe does not have this is the approved starting strength intermediate program. Doesn't exist, right? There's principles, and then how you apply those principles. There's best practices, and then there's shitty practices. So that. In terms of assistance exercises and assistance exercises, accessory exercises, man, it makes it really simple. Recently, Rip has gotten on this thing about bodybuilding's like his new CrossFit. For years, it was like CrossFit. Everything was CrossFit. Then it was D1, and then now it's bodybuilding. Really, it's the same problem all the time, right? It's just kind of like what's most visible, sort of in the physical culture type thing. So it's always the same problem. So if we can define things and define the terms and talk about what we're actually discussing, I think it's really useful. So I'm going to answer your question here in just a second. All right. So like for assistance exercises, for example, okay, people get this idea that because of something that Rip said or another coach said or whatever, that it's always binary. It's yes or no, good or bad, right? None of this shit is bad. It's just like nutrition. There's no such thing as a bad macronutrient, right? But it's easy to villainize carbs, for example, because cutting out carbs works well for so many people. All right, but the same thing kind of happens with this simplified thinking in terms of exercise programming, where it's okay, assistance exercise bad because Rip said bad, right? If you think about variations on the lifts, and you think about, so there's the main lifts, squat, press, bench, deadlift. There's variations, rack pulls, haltings, pause squats, etc. I would argue, again, for my lazy thinking, that anything that's not a low bar back squat is a variation on the squat. So a high bar squat, front squat, it's very easy, right? Because my objective is to use the exercise that's going to produce the highest force stress. So it makes it very simple. So everything then is either a variation or isolation exercise. So what does a variation or an isolation exercise do? It still works the muscles, right? Or the body. It just does it at a much lower dose of stress, right? Much lower dose of stress. So where do they fit? They fit as a way to manage stress. So who needs to have their stress managed? Not novices, not intermediates, people who've been training a while, or people who are severely fucked up, right? So in a rehab setting, absolutely, you're gonna do isolation stuff. You're gonna do lots of variations. For people who've been training for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, they're gonna be doing assistance exercises. They're gonna be doing variations, because just doing the lifts by themselves becomes too stressful and also is too much wear and tear, right? So you need to put additional stress on your body, but also you need to limit the stress that you're exposing yourself to. If I had Haley, for example, low bar squatting 3 days a week, she's gonna top out very, very quickly and not make any more progress, right? So her program looks more like one really heavy squat variation every week, and then a bunch of squat variations and some assistance exercises because you have to keep that stress high. So the same thing applies to rep schemes, right? So the optimal rep scheme for driving a strength adaptation for men is 5, for women it's about 3. All right, so that's for driving the strength adaptation. But what actually drives the strength adaptation is high force production. So after a few months of training, you've got to start getting the weight heavier in triples or singles. All right, so the way like your energy systems work and force production works for that matter, is things drop off very, very quickly. All right, so like here's your high force production, like your 1 rep max over here, and then here's your 5 rep max in the middle of like the rep ranges that actually produce some kind of effect, right? And we can like cut it off at 20 over here. All right, and notice that 5's in the middle. It's not like math where 10 is in the middle. It's at 5 is in the middle. All right, so it goes from 1 to 3 in terms of like force production, right? So high force production, it's 1, 3, and then there's this big gap between 3 and 5. And then there's this big gap between 5 and 8. And then there's this big gap between 8 and 10. And then now you're at 20, all right? In terms of force production, this is how it works. See what I'm getting at, Eric? So once you start heading into the 8 to 10 rep range, you're from a energy system standpoint and from a force production standpoint, you're getting really far away from high force production. So where does that fit? It fits in a stress management strategy, right? If I want to do low bar squats, but doing up here is going to affect recovery, right? I need a lighter day. You could do it for sets of 8, right? And you automatically limit the amount of force production you're applying. And then you can convince yourself of all kinds of shit, like it's doing hypertrophy and it's doing all these other things. Probably not. You're just limiting the amount of stress that you're doing. What's making you bigger and stronger is the work that you're doing on that end of the spectrum.
Could the adaptation for a time be beneficial to a 1 rep max?
Doesn't work that way. The high force production work that you're doing is what's either maintaining your strength or improving the strength. Everything else is just essentially a way to think about it is it's keeping you from detraining. So yeah, I think people do stuff in this rep range and then convince themselves that it's helping this, but it's not. It's managing the stress. Exactly right.
It's like an overall tonnage deal. Right?
Exactly. So, and then people form a religion out of this, out of this rep range, and then they don't grow. They stop growing, right? Yeah. Somehow people have equated 8 to 12 reps as quote unquote hypertrophy. And then they'll devise a program that lives just in this rep range. And then it's not hypertrophy because they haven't grown. Like hypertrophy means bigger muscles, right? And all you have to do, like if you're, I fuck with people all the time. So they're like, I want to do a hypertrophy program. I was like, all right, cool, do it. Measure your arms today and then measure your arms in 12 weeks. And then let's see if it was a really a hypertrophy program.
Same size arms.
And they don't grow. Right.
They forgot the stretch mediated part. The stretch mediated hypertrophy.
Yeah.
I mean, I also don't want you to think it's like evil because he's not saying that either.
Yeah.
It's just we see it a lot. It's like, oh, 8s are like the new whatever. I mean, do I use 8s occasionally? Mainly like a guy's been super consistent. He's getting like kind of bored seeing 5 all the time.
Sure.
And I might say like, hey, on Fridays, you're going to hit 2 triples really heavy and you're going to take 100 pounds off the bar and do 8. Right, and it's like, oh, this is like this new thing, right? But it's just stress management.
Yep. And the pump does feel great. I mean, for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
And there's probably a little bit of mental, like, if you do 8s for a little while, when you go to do 5, it just doesn't seem quite as bad. It's shorter, right? It's only 5, right? Like, I mean, so there's all kind of stuff, but yeah, I wouldn't.
Yeah, if I program people to do like dumbbell work or something, I'll use sets of 8, but the reason is not because sets of 8 are magical. It's because if I tell somebody who's like a hard charger to do sets of 3 with dumbbells, they're gonna fuck themselves up. That's really all it is, right? That's all it is. Because I could put a heavy barbell in their hands and get a more beneficial and an even heavier load. Well, all of a sudden I got somebody in their home gym trying to do triples with 100-pound dumbbells. They're going to fuck up their elbows. They're going to fuck up their shoulders, potentially drop a dumbbell on their face. If I say sets of 8, then you get a lot of work, but you're limiting the load that you can actually do, right? So because that's a distraction, right? The heavy work needs to be done with barbells. And if we're trying to manage stress, we're going to do that however we can, but then I have to make sure that the load is appropriate. And my tool for doing that is going to be probably reps, right?